What's going on, guys? Kevin or the Sports Geek here, and in this video I'm going to go over my new Fantasy Labs NFL Pro model. Alright, so I'm logged into my Fantasy Labs account and I've got the Pro models open. These are available to anyone with a Fantasy Labs account. If you don't have an account yet, you can sign up using the link in the YouTube description below this video. But as you can see here, we've got the Sports Geek model. Once you're signed into your account, you can click copy and copy that into your own models and use it whenever you like. So as you can see here, I've got the Sports Geek model loaded up, and then over here you can see the plus or minus for the points for the top 5% of the players at that position versus the expected points for a given salary. So what that means basically is they've looked at past data, and let's say a quarterback costs $7,000. He might be expected to score 20 DraftKings points, and the top 5% in this model would be plus 4.87 points above that. So going through each position here, I won't go through all the sliders that I set for the Sports Geek model, but I'll take a look at the plus minus here. We got quarterback plus 4.87, running back plus 4.69, receivers plus 3.94, tight ends are 3.37, and defense is 1.65. So everything came out well. What I do when I create these pro models is I select my sliders based on the position beforehand. I don't mess around the sliders and see how high I can get this plus minus. I set it to what I think they should be at, and then I click the update button and see where we're at. So everything turned out really well. Really happy with this Sports Geek model and how it turned out, and very excited to use it for the 2016 season. All right, so in the second part of the video, I just want to talk about how I create lineups using the Sports Geek model. A lot of people have been asking me how I go about creating my different lineups. So there's a couple different ways I'll do it. I can use the generate multiple lineup tool with stacks, or I can hand pick my lineups just going through the Sports Geek model. So I think this year I'll be using the stacks feature and the build lineups multiple generator tool quite a bit. But in the past, I really like building them by hand as well. So especially for my higher entry fee contests, I'll probably be building them by hand. So let's say I'm throwing in 3 lineups for a contest. Instead of using the multiple lineup generator for that, I would just build them by hand. So for example, let's say I'm building a lineup by hand. Obviously, I'll do a ton of research beforehand before I start building my lineups. But let's say I was just going to quickly build the lineup here. So right away, usually look for the dark green on Fantasy Labs. And that isn't to say that I won't go down. I'll definitely be going down to these quarterbacks in light green. There's a couple quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford, that I like this week. Blake Bortles, I think, would be a good play. He's expensive, but good GPP play. So I definitely will be going into these lower green colors, maybe even the red sometimes, but it's very unlikely for me to go to these red players on the Fantasy Labs model. But for most part, I stick to the darker green. So let's say I went through here and I said I want to build the GPP lineup here. I'm going to go with Russell Wilson as my quarterback. So I lock him in the lineup tool here. And then right away, I'm going to go find my stack with Russell Wilson. So I would go over, sort it by team, and go down to Seattle. And then look at the ratings for these players. And obviously, I've done my research beforehand too, so I kind of know which players I like. But I'm going to do a double stack here because his receivers are pretty cheap. I'm going to go with Jermaine Kearse and Doug Baldwin. So I've got a double wide receiver stack with Russell Wilson. And then it's showing you the remaining money per player. So we've got about $5,000 per player to spend. So I'd go back to maybe running back. That I kind of switch this up all the time. Maybe I'll go with my receiver next, or maybe my tight end, but I usually leave defense to last, and tight end is usually second last. But for this video, I'll pick one running back first. So going to this model, again, I would have done a lot of research. So maybe I would eliminate one of these guys. Maybe Duke Johnson I don't like for the week, so I would eliminate him. I wouldn't even be thinking of him, even though he's ranking pretty high. Let's say I want to get a cheap running back in here. So I went with Spencer Ware this week. So I lock in Spencer Ware, and then it shows me that I've got about $5,500 left per player. So again, I'm going to try to pick my second running back now because I really want Latavius Murray, let's say, at $5,600. So I lock him in, and then we can see we're working with $5,500 per position for the last 4 spots. That includes a defense, which is usually pretty cheap. So I can pay up for a pretty high priced wide receiver right now, I believe. So let's check that out. Go to the wide receivers on the Sports Geek model. And we got the 4th rated wide receiver here is Julio Jones, 9,400. Let's just see if we can make that work. So I'll throw him in there. And then that leaves us with 4,200. So we should be able to make that work with a cheap tight end and a cheap defense. So going over to, I'll go to tight end next, and then I'll go flex. So tight end, Dwayne Allen, number 1. He's beating the next guy by 10 points. And I talked about him in my video. I like him. So let's lock him in. And then what I'll do usually is I'll sometimes put in a defense. I can switch up this defense afterwards. But let's say that I want to put in, let's go down to Houston. I talked about Houston in my video. So I go over to Houston. Now I've got 6,200 remaining. So I can go to flex here and find the highest ranking player around 6,200. But let's say I want it to be a wide receiver. So I'm just going to go to wide receivers. Sometimes I'll just sort it by salary that I have remaining. So let's go salary. Let's see if there's anyone around 6,200 that I really like. So Moncrief might be a good play at 6,000. He's ranking pretty well in the model, and he's got a good matchup versus Detroit. So I would just go ahead and lock him in possibly if I wanted him as a play for week 1. Another one, I might go Landry as well. So let's say I did my research and I actually liked Landry a little better, even though he ranks a little lower in the Sportsgeek model. Lock him in. Got $200 left over, which is fine. Usually I have around 49,600 or above, but sometimes I'll even go below that. But usually between $0 and $400 left over is perfectly fine. And that would be a good GPP lineup for me. So that would be one way that I would create my single GPP lineup. Obviously, I would do all the research beforehand as well. So I wouldn't just be randomly clicking on players. I would know which players I kind of wanted to target. And that would be how I'd create one lineup. And then I would go repeat that process maybe with another stack and do that one more time for 3 lineups if I was doing 3 lineups. Now, if you're entering, let's say you're entering the quarter arcade 25 cent and you want 100 lineups in that, I would be using the stack feature and the build lineup feature. So I'll show you the stack feature real quick. Let's say I want, this is for GPP. So I'm going to go with a quarterback and a 2 wide receiver stack. We're going to build it by the Sportsgeek model ratings and see which ones it gives us. So obviously this one is going to be very popular, maybe not with these exact receivers, but Prescott at 5K this week. Terrence Williams and Cole Beasley are just dirt cheap. So that might actually be a good stack. A lot of people will be going with Dez Bryant. Maybe he gets his catches but doesn't score a touchdown, and these 2 players do. That might be a good GPP stack, but I'm going to go with, let's use the Russell Wilson example again with Curse and Baldwin just to kind of compare how it builds the lineups for you. So I'm going to go with that same stack. And then this time I want to build, so I'm building 100 lineups. I'm going to do 25 lineups with Russell Wilson stack. So what you might do is you might find some running backs or some other players, receivers, tight ends, defenses that you want to set your exposure to. Let's say that I want Ingram to be in 50% of my lineup. So I'll set his exposure to 50. That's the only running back I really care for. So I'm going to only set him for 50. And then wide receiver, let's say I want Marvin Jones in 50% of mine. So I'm just going to set those 2 exposures. Everything else, I'm just going to trust in the model and see what it comes up with. So I'm going to go to generate multiple lineups. I'm going to set this to 25. Minimum salary cap, I'll do 99.2%. Max exposure to a player other than the stack is going to be 50%. So I don't want too much exposure to one player. So we can get lots of different lineups there with the stack. And then the flex position, let's keep it to a wide receiver or running back. Max players in the same team, 3. Force quarterback, wide receiver stack. Yeah, that will already be set. Avoid opposing defenses. Yep. And only one running back per game. I'm going to leave that unchecked. I don't really care about that. And then we're going to find players in the top 25% in the model for their position. So there we go. We got 25 different lineups, and it's showing us the exposure here down the right-hand side. You can see I set the max exposure to 50%, and it went a little over that, which is perfectly fine, 52%. So it's got Ware in 52, Antonio Brown in 52. The 2 guys I set to 50 are in 48, so that's perfect. And then it looks like we've got a good mix of players. So if that stack goes off with Russell Wilson and Curse and Baldwin, there's a good chance I've got a pretty good lineup here with the good mix of lineups I have. So that would be 25 lineups. Then you would save it to your lineups, go create more, and then export them. But let's say, for example, you're going through your exposures and you say, I really don't want Detroit versus Indianapolis in week 1. They're at 20%. What I'm going to do, you can either go to your model and exclude them completely from the model if you don't want them at all that week, or you can set their exposure to 0, press the save button, and then try generating lineups again. So we've got our lineups again. You can see everything is pretty much the same, but now going down here, we've got no Detroit in the defense position. So that's perfect. We eliminated Detroit. Now we've got the lineups we want, and we save it, and then we go create the other stacks and then export them to DraftKings. So those are really the 2 ways that I'll be creating lineups this year. I'll be testing out both. I'll kind of track and see if my lineup generator lineups are doing well, or if my hand-built ones are doing better. I think it's going to be a mix. A lot of times I've had success with lineup generators, but a lot of times I've won some big money creating them by hand as well. So I think for the lower buy-in contest, when I'm entering like the $3 contest and trying to put in 100 entries, instead of trying to build those all by hand, I'll use the stack feature and the multiple lineup generator. And then when I'm entering higher entry contests, maybe the $20 ones or whatever, $100, whatever it happens to be, I'll be building those by hand. So that's really how I create my lineups using the SportsGeek model. So I hope you guys have a lot of success. We've had some great success with my MLB model and my golf model. I've heard a lot about it on Twitter from people winning money. So hopefully the SportsGeek NFL model does the same for you guys. Hope you guys have a successful season, win some money, and have some fun. And again, if you don't have a Fantasy Labs account, check them out in the link in the YouTube description. Talk soon, guys.